Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stopped to wonder who actually rescued ancient Indian history before formal archaeology was even a thing? I mean, we're always hearing about the massive empires and the great builders, right? But the actual survival of that history, that entirely depends on the folks who scrambled to save the pieces before they vanished forever.
So, welcome to today's explainer. We're focusing on Sir Walter Elliot, the forgotten pioneer of Indian archaeology. Now, when we talk about the early days of uncovering India's past, it's usually the famous names like Alexander Cunningham or John Marshall taking all the spotlight. But decades before they even entered the scene, there was Elliot, a man whose absolute relentless passion preserved crucial evidence that laid the foundation for, well, basically everyone else.
Chapter 1. The Forgotten Pioneer. Let's see how Elliot was far more than just your standard British civil servant. He was essentially a one-man historical rescue team. Moving into Chapter 2, from prisoner to scholar, we've got to look at his early life because his path to becoming a master scholar was incredibly unconventional.
Now, what's really interesting here is just the massive scale of his life and career. Born in Scotland in 1803, Elliot arrived in Madras, India in 1820. He was just 17 years old. Can you imagine that? Being a teenager dropped into a completely unfamiliar world, yet somehow stepping onto a path that would lead to some of the most critical archaeological saves of the century.
And he didn't just pick up a few local phrases. We're talking Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Marathi, Hindustani, Persian, and Arabic. 7 languages. Unlike a lot of colonial officials who kind of just kept to themselves, Elliot dove headfirst into the culture. This linguistic genius was literally his superpower. Immersing himself in all these languages meant he could read ancient inscriptions, converse directly with local scholars, and access rich traditions that most Europeans couldn't even begin to understand.
But here is where his story takes a super dramatic turn. In 1824, during the famous Kittur Rebellion, led by Rani Chennamma, Elliot was actually captured by the rebels and held prisoner for several weeks. But rather than growing bitter or, terrified, he used this as his scholarly origin story. He used his captivity to deeply study Indian society, local customs, and the complex caste system. Actually, scratch that. He literally turned a prison sentence into a masterclass in anthropology.
All right, Chapter 3, Saving the Amaravati Stupa. Let's see how this intense background builds up to his most monumental rescue mission.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what was at stake. The situation was dire. Before Elliot's intervention, the ancient Buddhist site of Amaravati in Andhra Pradesh was actively being destroyed. Local quarrying meant that these magnificent ancient sculptured stones were just being broken up and reused for basic everyday construction. When Elliot visited in 1845, he stepped in, meticulously documented the site, and collected these sculptured limestone panels. Today, they're famously known as the Elliot marbles. He pretty much single-handedly stopped an absolute cultural disaster.
So, why did saving these specific sculptures matter so much? Because they were basically the key for modern historians trying to piece together India's ancient past. It's like a giant puzzle, and these artifacts unlocked our understanding of early Buddhism in South India. They showed us the evolution of Buddhist architecture and iconography, and gave us incredible insights into ancient Andhra history and Satavahana-era art. Without Elliot, this entire chapter of history might have been permanently erased.
Chapter 4. Coins, Stones, and Inscriptions. Let's look at his broader crusade to save historical data right across the region.
His expertise was astonishingly broad. Just look at how he worked across all these different fields. In numismatics, he studied dynastic coins, helping historians trace political history and ancient trade networks. In fact, his landmark book, Coins of Southern India, is still a vital resource today. In epigraphy, he gathered stone and temple rubbings and made sure to preserve copper plate grants before they could decay. And in prehistory, well, long before modern excavations were a thing, he was systematically documenting megalithic monuments and burial sites in the Nilgiri Hills. He wasn't just finding cool old stuff, he was methodically archiving the data of an entire civilization.
Chapter 5. Beyond History, the Naturalist. Because obviously his insatiable curiosity didn't just stop at human history.
If you thought his historical work was impressive, get this. While holding down some of the most demanding, top-tier administrative jobs imaginable, including acting as the governor of Madras in 1858, he was also operating as a full-on zoologist. He documented mammals, birds, plants, marine life, so much so that several animal species were actually named after him.
And oh yeah, he even found the time to be pen pals with the legendary Charles Darwin. The guy was truly a 19th century polymath. Which brings us to Chapter 6, A Legacy of Memories, tracing his journey after retiring to Scotland in 1860.
Here is an incredibly poignant fact for you. In his final years, after earning a knighthood back in Scotland, Sir Walter Elliot went completely blind. But his relentless dedication, it didn't waver for a single second. Even without his sight, he continued his scholarly work, studying inscriptions, coins, and historical records right up until his death at the age of 84 in 1887. Just phenomenal dedication.
He did not build empires. He preserved memories. So the crucial point is this. Walter Elliot wasn't a king. He wasn't a conqueror. But his foundational archives, his meticulous collections, and his dramatic rescues of places like Amaravati created the very bedrock that enabled all future generations of archaeologists, figures like Burgess, Sewell, and Longhurst, to do their jobs. He ensured that the past actually had a future.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. The most fascinating thing about history is that there are always more quiet, unsung heroes just waiting in the shadows. So what do you think? Which forgotten hero of history or archaeology should we explore next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and definitely join us again next time as we uncover more hidden chapters of our past. See you then!